Well, and to that end, I think I think complexity is the new name of the game, and we're definitely not the only ones to be thinking that or seeing it. Werner Vogel, the CTO of AWS, maybe just Amazon overall, I'm not sure. He traditionally closes out reInvent, sort of talking to the builders themselves. This is where the things tend to get more practical. Last year, he famously talked about the need to be focused on cost. I know you got very happy with the whole focus on FinOps. And this year, he is talking about complexity is inevitable and created a brand new word, I think anyway, Simplexity.
Mhm.
It's like, okay, but basically the premise of his talk was, I think there were a handful of sort of axioms that he sort of threw out. And the first is that we have to acknowledge that complexity is inevitable. I fully agree with that. I've said that for a long time, that it is the new standard, that as a result of that, you need to be planning for failure. This is something he's been saying for a long time. And that as you do that, then it actually decreases your chance of failure, one of the core ethos of AWS altogether. But probably the part that I found most interesting is something that I think is easy to kind of lose in this conversation, and that is that there are two types of complexity. And he pointed
Mhm.
out to this idea of intended complexity, which is something that I talk about a lot, where you have to have complexity to solve the business challenges that are facing. But then he also talks about the unintended complexity, effectively the, this is my word, the laziness or the inattentiveness to the systems and the intertwined complexity of all of this. Um, in which it's woven into and sort of sneaks into the architectural decisions. And this is the classic technical debt conversation, right? And it ends up slowing you down, making systems harder to maintain. And so his sort of call to action was to discern this. To You can't use the fact that we live in this complex environment as a scapegoat. You need to distinguish between these two and root out this unintended complexity and embrace the intended complexity, but then focus on how you manage that. And I just thought, it was all the talk about AI and all the talk about super hype. I love that this was just very pragmatic and talking to the reality on the ground that CIOs and enterprise IT leaders need to be dealing with.
Yes, it reminds me of Nassim Taleb's concept of anti-fragility, where he talks about complexities that work together to reinforce each other rather than being one-offs that are difficult to manage. And I think this speaks to why we are digging back into data quality and data assurance and data management to such an extent, because we have to go back to basics, what Amazon would call primitives, and figure out what are the right solid building blocks to build this next generation of technology. Because as fantastic as it is to be able to talk to our data now, it doesn't mean much if our data isn't clean. So we have to figure out how to get those building blocks back in place before we start now building a layer of agents on top of that, and then whatever comes after that.
Yeah, it's funny. My I think I've probably mentioned on here before. My dad in the 1980s ran SWAT teams, and he had this phrase that slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? With this idea that you have to focus on effectively this blocking and tackling. That if you
Mhm.
try to focus on all the fancy tactics, then you just sort of get yourself wrapped around the axle. And I think when it comes to IT, almost universally, it's the same thing. Every time I talk to a CIO that has truly been effective and successful, the answer is almost the same. They got the basics right. They have the
Mhm.
blocking and tackling. They focus on those primitives, as Amazon would call it. And by doing that, it gives them the flexibility to adapt and to shift and to change. And I think the only part I would say that's different is that it used to be the way we did that is we did all that rationalization. We removed the complexity. And now we have to recognize that elements of that complexity are not removable. They have to exist because of the nature of the business. Then AI is just amping that up even further. And so now it's about how do you discern between those two. So I thought it was great. I thought it was, in my opinion, the highlight of the show. Honestly, it almost always is, just to try to bring this all back to reality and addressing the actual, the truth of what
Yeah,
was really going on.
Werner Vogels is one of the few guys who truly lives up to the hype every single time. And that's a really hard bar in a world of extreme hype in the tech world.